I used to believe tragedy announced itself, that it gave you time to prepare, to breathe, to say goodbye. But I learned the truth that night. Disaster doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. I had just closed my eyes when the first spark lit the fuse that would erase everything I called home. It started as a faint crackle, so delicate it almost sounded like rain. I remember lying there, half asleep, my mind slow to register the shift in the air. Then came the smell. Sharp, chemical, suffocating. In one heartbeat, the comfort of my room turned into a trap. I threw off the blanket and stumbled to my feet. The hallway glowed orange, shadows twisting along the walls like living creatures. The air shimmered with heat, thick with smoke. Somewhere beneath the roaring chaos, wood groaned, glass shattered, and something inside me broke with it. My heart pounded in my ears as I shouted for help, but my voice vanished into the fire's roar. I ran toward my mother's room, though deep down I already knew she wasn't there. She had passed years before, yet in that moment, instinct made me reach for her anyway. Every step felt heavier, every breath a fight against air that no longer wanted to be breathed. The house that once protected me had turned against me. Flames crawled along the ceiling, licking the walls like 1,000 tongues of hunger. The family portraits, the ones we'd hung so carefully, curled and blackened in their frames. My childhood bedroom was gone, replaced by a storm of sparks and smoke that stung my eyes until tears became meaningless. I tried to run to the front door, but the metal handle seared my palm the moment I touched it. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the monster around me. I turned back, coughing violently, and spotted the picture of my mother above the mantel. It was small, fragile, and somehow untouched by the flames. That photograph had survived every move, every heartbreak. I couldn't leave it behind now. I pressed the wet edge of my sleeve over my mouth and ran back for it, ignoring the searing heat that tore across my skin. The air grew darker, the smoke thicker. My eyes watered until the world blurred, but my hand found the frame. I pulled it from the wall and clutched it to my chest, its glass cracking under my grip as the ceiling moaned above me. The fire seemed alive now, no longer chaos, but consciousness. It moved like it could see me, chasing me toward the stairs, driving me back each time I tried to escape. The air vibrated with a deep animal growl. I could feel the floorboards trembling under my feet, warning me I had seconds before the house would give way. My lungs burned, my vision dimmed, and for one terrifying instant I thought, this is how people disappear. Then something shifted. The noise dulled, the light changed. Through the blinding haze a shape emerged, tall, still, human in form, but somehow wrong. The flames bent around it, refusing to touch. The air near it seemed cooler, quieter. I blinked, convinced my mind was conjuring ghosts to comfort me. But no, it was real. It was watching me. I froze, my body trembling, my hand still gripping that cracked photograph. For a second I forgot the fire, the pain, even the smoke clawing at my throat. The world narrowed to that single figure standing in the middle of destruction, unmoving, untouched, unafraid. It didn't belong there. Nothing living could. As the roof cracked above me and another beam crashed to the floor, I dragged myself toward the open door. The night air hit my face like salvation. I fell to my knees in the yard, gasping, half-conscious, the photograph still pressed against my heart. Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors shouted. Someone pulled me up, asked if I was all right. But I couldn't answer, because when I turned back toward the ruins of my home, the fire had begun to die, and through the smoke, standing in the glow of fading embers, was the same figure. Our eyes met across the wreckage, calm, unblinking, impossibly still. And in that moment I felt warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fire. My lips parted to call out, but before a word escaped, the figure tilted its head, almost as if it recognized me, and vanished into the smoke like a breath swallowed by the night. The morning after the fire, I learned that silence can be louder than any scream. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforts you. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. The flames had died hours ago, but their memory clung to the air, thick with smoke and the ghost of everything I'd lost. When I opened my eyes, the sky was a pale gray, the kind of color that feels like grief made visible. The firefighters were gone. The neighbors had returned to their homes, their lives intact. I stood in front of what used to be my house, now a blackened skeleton, a hollow frame of twisted beams jutting up like bones from the earth. The air still carried the bitter scent of burned wood and melted plastic, the smell of everything that had once meant home. I stepped over the caution tape, ignoring the faint protest from an officer nearby. The ground crackled beneath my shoes, shards of glass, wet ash, and fragments of what had been my life. The kitchen, where I once sat with my mother on quiet mornings, was unrecognizable. The walls had collapsed inward, the roof hung like a broken wing. Yet somehow, amid the ruin, I still looked for pieces of her. A mug, a recipe book, a trace of her handwriting. People came by in passing. Faces I knew, faces I didn't. They whispered words meant to comfort me. But pity has a way of sounding like blame. "You're lucky to be alive," one woman said, her voice trembling. Lucky. I wanted to ask her what kind of luck it was to stand surrounded by ashes and call it survival. But I just nodded, because there was nothing else to say. By afternoon, the cleanup trucks arrived. They told me to stay back while they cleared the debris, but I couldn't. I crouched near what was left of the living room, brushing soot from a pile of charred frames. My hands shook as I found the photograph I had saved the night before, the image of my mother, now blistered and warped by heat. The glass had melted across her smile, trapping her behind a veil of flame even in memory. I felt the first tear before I realized I was crying. It wasn't sorrow, not exactly. It was disbelief. The world had ended for me, and yet it kept turning. Cars still passed on the street, birds still called from the trees untouched by the fire. I was surrounded by life, but I was no longer part of it. That night I stayed in the shelter the Red Cross had set up nearby. The walls were white, sterile, too clean for someone who still smelled of smoke. People murmured quietly in their beds, some lost in their own tragedies. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tracing the outline of the burn on my hand. It didn't hurt anymore. That frightened me most of all, that I was starting to feel nothing. Days passed in a blur of condolences, forms to sign, endless questions from insurance agents who spoke as if pain could be catalogued and replaced. Each night, I returned to the shelter, clutching the warped photograph like a lifeline. The more I stared at it, the more I thought of that figure in the fire, the one untouched by flame, standing calm as my world fell apart. I tried to dismiss it as shocking. The mind plays cruel tricks in trauma, but something inside me refused to forget that stillness, that quiet presence that seemed almost protective. Sometimes, when the room was dark and the air still, I swore I could feel that same calm pressing gently against my heart, like unseen hands keeping me from breaking. On the fourth night, sleep finally claimed me, deep and heavy. I dreamed of smoke twisting into shapes, of voices rising from embers. When I woke, the air in the room was colder than before. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Everyone else was asleep, but I sat up, pulse racing, certain I wasn't alone. I turned toward the window. The street outside was empty, wet with rain, the street lamp flickering through mist. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer, searching for the source of that sudden chill. The world seemed to hold its breath with me. And then I heard it. Faint at first, almost a sigh carried on the wind, but it grew clearer, sharper, until it wrapped around my name like a promise. Elena. The whisper slid through the night air, soft and certain. I froze, heart pounding, my throat too tight to scream. It came again, closer this time, threading through the silence like smoke. Elena. The voice was the same one I had heard in the fire. That voice should have terrified me. But instead it felt familiar. It carried the same calm that had surrounded me in the fire, a sound that didn't belong to this world. I sat frozen on the edge of the cot, my fingers clutching the blanket, listening as it drifted closer through the half-open window. Then, through the fogged glass, I saw movement, a shape forming from the mist, stepping into the faint glow of the streetlight. He stood just beyond the fence of the shelter courtyard, tall, motionless, his presence quiet, yet overwhelming. His coat was drenched from the rain, water sliding down his sleeves in glistening lines, but his posture was steady, almost peaceful. The moment I saw him, my breath caught. There was something eerily familiar in the way he stood, the same stillness I had seen in the flames that night. I should have screamed, called someone, done anything except open the door. But I didn't. My body moved on instinct, as if pulled by a thread I couldn't see. The night air rushed in the moment I stepped outside, cool and sharp against my skin, the rain falling soft and steady. The world felt unnaturally quiet. No cars, no voices, just the sound of water and my own heartbeat. He didn't move as I approached. When I finally found my voice, it came out smaller than I expected. "Who are you?" He looked at me then, not with curiosity, but with recognition. His eyes were pale, reflective, holding something between sorrow and peace. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his tone gentle but firm, like he wasn't scolding me, but warning me. I hesitated. "Do I know you?" He tilted his head, the faintest smile crossing his lips. "In a way," he said softly, "but you wouldn't remember." Rain slid across his face, but he didn't blink, didn't shiver. I was trembling, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the way he looked at me, like he was seeing something more than what stood before him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us seemed to fade, the sound of the rain growing distant. There was something about him that drew me in, not attraction, not fear, but familiarity, like remembering a song I hadn't heard in years. I wanted to ask more, to demand why he was there, but when I looked down, I realized something strange. The ground beneath his feet wasn't wet. The rain fell through him, not on him, vanishing before it touched the earth. My breath caught in my throat. "You're not real," I whispered. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped forward and extended his hand. "You've been carrying too much," he said quietly. "Let someone help you." I stared at that hand, unable to move. His fingers looked solid, human, yet I could see faint light beneath the skin, a soft glow pulsing like a heartbeat. My mind raced, every logical thought tearing at the edges of what I was seeing, but my heart recognized something my eyes refused to. Without meaning to, I reached out. The moment my hand brushed his, warmth flooded through me. Not heat like fire. Warmth like sunlight after a storm, spreading slowly, gently, dissolving the chill that had lived in my bones since the night of the fire. For a heartbeat, I wasn't standing in the rain anymore. I was somewhere else. A memory, maybe, or something deeper. I saw flashes. My childhood home before the fire. My mother's face lit by morning light, laughter echoing through the hallways. The images came and went in seconds, leaving behind a strange peace that felt impossible to explain. When I blinked, I was back outside. The rain was heavier now, thunder rolling in the distance. I looked at him, heart racing. "What are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just smiled, that same soft, knowing smile, and stepped back into the mist. The rain passed through him again, breaking his shape apart like smoke dissolving into the air. Panic surged through me. "Wait," I called out. taking a step forward. "Please, don't go." My voice echoed into the empty night. The courtyard was still, the street beyond deserted. Only the rain remained, relentless and cold. Then I saw it, something lying on the ground where he had stood. I ran forward, my shoes splashing through puddles, my pulse thundering in my ears. It was a coat, long, dark, and completely dry, despite the storm pouring from the heavens. I picked it up slowly, my fingers tracing the edge of its collar. The fabric was warm, impossibly so, and as I lifted it to my chest, a faint scent of smoke and rain clung to it. The exact scent that had surrounded me the night of the fire. My breath hitched, my body trembling. I turned in every direction, searching for him, but he was gone, vanished into the rain, leaving behind only that coat, dry and waiting, as if it had been meant for me all along. The next morning, I found something inside that coat, something that shouldn't have existed. When I slipped my hand into the pocket, my fingers brushed against paper, smooth and perfectly dry, despite the storm that had soaked everything else. I pulled it out carefully, my heart already racing, though I couldn't explain why. The paper was folded twice, the edges clean, unburned, untouched by time. I unfolded it with shaking hands, and there, in the faint, looping handwriting I could never forget, were the words that froze the blood in my veins. "There is light beyond the ashes." My mother's words. Her last words. I could almost hear her voice saying them again, soft and certain, moments before the fire took her years ago. I stared at the handwriting, the way the letters curled just slightly to the right, the way she always pressed too hard with her pen, and I knew without a shred of doubt that this was real. That note belonged to her. But how? The last time I had seen her handwriting was on a birthday card she left for me before she died. That card had burned in the fire. There was no way this note could exist, and yet here it was, warm in my hands, smelling faintly of smoke and something else I couldn't name. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned the note over, desperate for answers. On the back, scrawled in uneven ink, was an address. No name, no explanation, just a street I didn't recognize, written in a hand that wasn't hers. The lines were firm, deliberate, as though someone had written them with purpose. I sat there on my bed, the coat draped across my lap, my mind racing through possibilities that made no sense. Had the stranger from last night planted it? But how would he have known my mother's handwriting? How would he have known her words? The morning light filtered through the window, pale and trembling, dust particles swirling like ghosts. I unfolded the coat again, searching every inch for another clue. The inside lining was warm, soft, but hidden within the inner seam, near the collar, I felt a faint bulge. I slid my fingers inside and pulled out a small piece of torn cloth, burnt around the edges. It was from a shirt. My father's shirt. I sat frozen, staring at it, the weight of something I didn't yet understand pressing down on me. The air around me felt heavier, as if the room itself was listening. Every logical thought screamed that this was impossible, that I was losing my mind. But deep down, beneath the fear, another feeling began to stir. Something quieter, stranger. Hope. The address on the note seemed to burn in my mind. I couldn't shake it. I tried to distract myself, to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a cruel coincidence, maybe part of some twisted prank. But the memory of that stranger's eyes, calm and knowing, refused to fade. By afternoon, I gave up pretending I wasn't going to go. I wrapped the coat around my shoulders, tucked the note into my pocket, and stepped outside. The day was gray, the clouds heavy, as if the sky had been painted in ash. I didn't know where the address would lead me, but I knew I couldn't rest until I found out. The streets blurred past as I walked, buildings, faces, rain-slick sidewalks, all blending into one long stretch of uncertainty. I followed the address printed in my mind like a scar. 141 Willow Lane. With every block, my heart beat harder. It felt like walking toward a memory I wasn't supposed to have. The farther I went, the quieter the world became. The hum of traffic faded, the sounds of the city dulled, replaced by a strange, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat in the air. Finally, I reached it. At the end of a narrow road stood a small, forgotten house. Its paint had peeled away, vines curling up its walls like time reclaiming what once lived there. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, and yet the front door was slightly open, swaying in the wind, as if waiting for me. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the coat. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "There is light beyond the ashes." I stepped forward, one slow step after another, the wood creaking beneath my feet. The air smelled of rain and something faintly sweet, like smoke mixed with roses. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, and a breath of cold air swept past me, carrying with it a faint whisper, the same whisper that had called my name days ago. And then I saw him. He stood inside the doorway, exactly as he had before, tall, calm, wearing that same faint, knowing smile. His eyes caught mine, as though he'd been expecting me all along. The light from the doorway shimmered faintly across his coat, though it was completely dry. "You found it," he said softly, his voice more like a memory than sound. I froze where I stood, realization sinking like ice through my chest. He wasn't surprised to see me. He'd known I was coming. He said his name was Daniel, but even his name felt like a secret. It slipped from his tongue, softly, like a confession meant only for the wind. Standing there inside that dim house, with the scent of rain and smoke clinging to the walls, I had the strange feeling that he'd been living between worlds, half in the present, half in the past that had burned with mine. He motioned for me to follow. The house opened into a hall lined with photographs of strangers, men and women smiling in frames that had gathered decades of dust. At the end of the corridor was a door, and beyond it, a wide room filled with gentle light. I expected more ruin, but instead, I found life. The space was warm, almost impossibly so. Candles glowed on every windowsill, their flames steady despite the draft sneaking through the cracks. In the center of the room stood a long wooden table where a few people were eating soup and whispering quietly, their faces softened by the light. "This is the community center," Daniel said, setting down his coat. "A place for those who've lost everything to remember how to begin again." His voice carried a calm that drew me closer without my permission. The people around us smiled faintly in greeting, as if they recognized me, though we'd never met. Daniel handed me a mug of tea that smelled of honey and herbs. "You look like someone searching for a reason to stay," he said. I met his gaze, startled. "Stay where?" He shrugged lightly, his lips curling into the smallest smile. "Here. Anywhere. In the world." The warmth of the tea bled through my cold hands. His words shouldn't have made sense, yet somehow they did. Since the fire, every breath had felt like a question I couldn't answer. Now, standing before this quiet stranger, I felt the first faint echo of belonging. We talked for hours. About nothing at first, then about everything. I told him pieces of my story, the way the flames had swallowed my home, the way the silence afterward felt endless. He listened without interruption, his eyes steady, absorbing every word as though he had lived it himself. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Pain changes shape when someone sees it. You don't have to carry it, alone." The simplicity of the sentence broke me. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. He reached for a candle, holding it between us. "See how it burns?" he asked. "It consumes itself, but it gives light as it dies. That's what survival looks like." Something inside me shifted. I wanted to believe him, to let that small flame rewrite what the fire had destroyed. But the question that had been growing since the night before burst out before I could hold it back. How do you know all this? How do you know about me? He looked away, his jaw tightening. The light of the candles traced the edge of his face, revealing the faintest scar near his temple, a pale line that caught the glow like glass. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned toward me, his voice low, almost reluctant. Because I was there. The words hit harder than the fire ever had. I stared at him, the world tilting, the sound of rain outside fading into nothing. That night, I whispered. At the fire? He nodded once. I saw you before you saw me. My breath caught. You pulled me out. His eyes softened. Not exactly, he murmured. You were meant to survive. I just reminded myself of the flames. I didn't understand. None of it made sense, but the tone in his voice, the quiet certainty, the grief buried beneath it, made me afraid to press further. My thoughts tangled, searching for reason where there was only wonder. Who was this man who spoke like he'd bargained with death and won? I wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth from him. But something about the stillness in his expression silenced me. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The air in the room thickened, as if the walls were listening too. He turned toward the candles, his face half lit, half shadowed. Sometimes, he said softly, fire doesn't destroy. It reveals what's meant to endure. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but the words never came. The wind slipped through the broken window pane, and all at once, every candle in the room flickered wildly, their flames bending toward Daniel, glowing brighter, whiter, until a faint halo of light shimmered around him. I blinked, certain my eyes were deceiving me. But when I looked again, he was standing perfectly still within that circle of light, his eyes fixed on me, calm and endless. The other candles went out, one by one, leaving only his glow to cut through the dark. That glow wasn't from the candles. It was coming from him. The light didn't flicker or dance like firelight. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat that belonged to something not entirely human. For a moment, I thought my mind was fracturing under the weight of grief and shock. But as I watched, I realized it was real. The light wasn't burning him. It was inside him. I froze, unable to speak. The room smelled of wax and smoke, yet Daniel stood untouched, a faint radiance beneath his skin, as though his veins carried light instead of blood. The others in the community center didn't seem to notice. They continued talking softly, eating, existing in a calm I couldn't understand. Either they couldn't see it, or they had accepted what I wasn't ready to. He looked at me then, not startled, not apologetic, but knowing. Some people carry the fire within, he said quietly, as though explaining the unexplainable. His voice was low, but it hummed through the air like a vibration I could feel in my bones. I wanted to ask what he meant, to demand why I was seeing what no one else could, but his expression silenced me. It wasn't fear I felt. It was awe. The glow softened, fading slowly until his face returned to shadow. The candles flickered back to life, and the world seemed to breathe again. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Daniel smiled faintly. "Don't look so frightened," he said, almost teasing. "Light isn't always the enemy of darkness." "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. He turned away, picking up a fallen candle from the floor. "You don't have to. Not yet." That single phrase, "not yet," lodged itself deep in my mind. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a promise. But of what? He spent the next few hours moving through the room, speaking softly with the others. I watched him closely, trying to make sense of the impossible. Every time he touched something, a hand, a shoulder, a piece of broken wood, the air seemed to hum with faint warmth. And yet, no one reacted. It was as if they'd grown used to the miracle of his presence. I finally stood, gathering the courage to approach him again. "Why are you helping them?" I asked. He turned, his eyes reflecting candlelight. "Because no one else will," he said simply. "When the world forgets you, sometimes you need to be reminded you're still alive." His words pierced through me like truth. I wanted to tell him how lost I'd felt since the fire, how every breath since that night had been borrowed. But something about his stillness, the peace that clung to him, made me hesitate. He already knew. Somehow, he already knew everything I would say. As the evening stretched on, the others left one by one until only Daniel and I remained. The room was quiet now, just the faint hiss of candle wicks and the soft sound of rain beginning outside. "Do you ever sleep?" I asked softly, half smiling to hide my trembling voice. He laughed, a sound so gentle it felt like warmth itself. "Sometimes. When the world allows it." It was an answer that wasn't an answer, and I didn't push for more. Eventually, he walked me to the door. The night air was cold, the rain falling harder now, tapping against the roof in steady rhythm. "You can come back any time," he said. "Light isn't meant to be carried alone." The phrase lingered in my head, long after I left. I pulled his coat, tighter around me as I stepped into the rain. The fabric was heavy, but comforting, still warm from where it had rested on his shoulders. The streets were empty, the city muted under the downpour. My reflection followed me in every puddle. Broken and scattered, I reached the small shelter where I was staying and paused at the doorway, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, not with menace, but with quiet, protective attention. I turned to look down the street one last time. Through the rain and mist, I saw him. Daniel. Walking alone beneath the flickering streetlights, his pace unhurried, his head slightly bowed. The water poured around him in endless silver streams, yet not a single raindrop touched his body. It was as if the storm itself bent to avoid him, curving away like smoke from light. I stood frozen, the truth pressing against my chest like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. Whoever Daniel was, he wasn't just a man. I followed him that night, straight into a place I was never meant to see. The rain had slowed to a whisper, but the streets still glistened with reflected light, every puddle trembling as if warning me to turn back. Daniel walked ahead, unhurried, the glow that clung to him faint but steady, a thread of warmth guiding me through the chill. I didn't know why I followed. All I knew was that if I lost sight of him, I'd lose the only thing in this world that still made sense. He turned the corner behind the community center and disappeared into a narrow alley choked with vines. At its end stood an old stone building I'd never noticed before, a chapel so small and forgotten it looked swallowed by time. Its door hung crooked on rusted hinges, a sliver of golden light seeping through the crack. I hesitated, rainwater dripping from my hair, my heart slamming against my ribs. Something deep inside whispered that this was sacred ground, but not the kind sanctified by priests. Still, I pushed the door open. The air that met me was warm and sweet, heavy with wax and smoke. Inside, hundreds of candles burned in perfect stillness. Their flames didn't flicker. They hovered steady, each one anchored to a strip of paper resting beneath it. Names. So many names that the walls seemed to breathe with them. I stepped forward, drawn by a quiet pulse that seemed to hum through the room. Every name was written in careful script, some fading, some fresh, none familiar, until my eyes caught one near the front. My own. Elena Morgan. My breath caught. My knees weakened. The letters looked fresh, the ink glistening as though it had just been written. Beneath my name lay a candle taller than the rest, its flame bright, unwavering, alive. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, but a voice stopped me. "Don't," Daniel said from the shadows. I spun around. He was standing near the altar, his face half hidden in the candlelight. The sadness in his eyes rooted me where I stood. "What is this?" I demanded. "Why is my name here?" He didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted across the candles, his lips moving silently as though reciting prayers for each one. Finally, he whispered, "These are the ones who were touched by the fire." I frowned, not understanding. The fire. He nodded slowly. Every soul that crossed the edge between life and death and was pulled back. The ones who should have been lost, but weren't. My stomach tightened. "You mean survivors?" "Not quite," he said softly. "Survivors still belong entirely to this world." He turned toward me then, and the flicker of the flames caught the sorrow in his expression. "You were supposed to die, Elena." The room seemed to tilt. I shook my head, backing away from him. No, that's insane. I was rescued." "Were you?" His voice was calm, but the question cut through me like a blade. "Do you remember who pulled you out? Do you remember how you survived when everything around you burned?" Images flashed in my mind. The roaring fire, the collapsing ceiling, the figure standing untouched in the flames. The warmth that had held me. The voice that had said, "You're not alone." My throat closed. "You were there," I whispered. He nodded once. "I was there. But not as you think." I wanted to run, to escape that room full of names and ghosts, but my legs wouldn't move. The air had changed. The warmth of the candles now felt too alive, too conscious, like the fire itself was listening. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes gleaming faintly. "The moment your house fell, your body was between breaths, neither living nor gone. Something reached out for you, and I answered. I brought you back. But the cost—" He looked toward the candles again. "The cost is that the flame must always remember the ashes." I stared at him, words failing. Every beat of my heart echoed like thunder in the silence. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you're beginning to see the light," he said. "And once you see it, you can't unsee it." He reached for one of the smaller candles near my own and cupped his hand over it. The flame didn't die. It bent toward him, curling around his fingers like it recognized its master. "I don't believe this," I said, my voice breaking. "You're lying. You have to be." Daniel's eyes softened, almost pleading. "I wish I were." A sharp gust of wind slammed against the chapel door, rattling the windows. The candles swayed, their perfect stillness shattered. The hum that filled the room grew louder, rising like a storm about to break. "Daniel," I whispered, fear finally catching up to me. "What's happening?" He opened his mouth to speak. But before the words came, the wind roared through the room, sweeping past us in a single violent breath. Every flame vanished. Hundreds of lights extinguished in the same instant, plunging the chapel into total darkness. The warmth fled with them, replaced by a cold so sudden, it stole my breath. I couldn't see Daniel anymore, only the echo of his voice whispering my name through the black. And beneath that whisper, something else. A low, distant sound, like the crackle of fire returning from the dead. In that darkness, a voice whispered the truth I'd been running from. "You were saved for a reason," it said, quiet, yet it filled the air like thunder under my skin. I gasped, spinning toward the sound, my hands trembling as I reached out into the black. "Daniel?" My voice was thin, barely a sound, swallowed by the shadows pressing close. The air was thick with smoke that wasn't real, warm like breath, heavy like memory. Then a faint glow began to rise, soft and slow, illuminating fragments of the chapel, the altar, the broken pews, the wax pooling beneath extinguished candles. And there he was. Daniel stood before me, closer than before, his hand pressed over his heart, light seeping between his fingers like a pulse made visible. "Not all flames destroy," he said, his voice steady and full of quiet power. "Some awaken." The words echoed inside me, reverberating through every place the fire had ever touched. I realized he wasn't talking about the fire that burned my home. He was talking about the one I'd been carrying since that night, the one I tried to bury beneath guilt, fear, and loss. I took a shaky step forward. What are you? He met my gaze without flinching. The question isn't what I am, he said softly. It's why you're still here. The light from his chest brightened, throwing soft gold across his face. His eyes reflected it, alive and ancient all at once. The heat rolling from him wasn't like the fire that scarred me. It was warm, but gentle, almost alive, as if the air itself bent to his presence. Why me? I whispered. Why did I survive when everyone else didn't? His expression shifted, pain flickering across it like a shadow. Because you weren't supposed to leave yet. The fire wasn't meant to end you. It was meant to awaken what still slept. My heart thudded in my chest. Awaken what? He stepped closer, and the space between us shimmered faintly, like heat rising off desert sand. You, he said simply. The part of you that still listens. I didn't understand, and yet I did. Every night since the fire, I'd felt something. A weight behind my thoughts, a pull in my chest whenever the world went silent. I had blamed it on grief, on trauma. But now, standing in that half-lit chapel, I realized it was something else. The air crackled faintly, a low hum that crawled over my skin. The candles remained unlit, yet the room glowed with that same impossible warmth. I watched Daniel's hand move from his chest to mine, hovering just above it. I could feel the energy radiating from him, a quiet current threading through the air. Close your eyes, he said. Against every instinct. I obeyed. At first, there was nothing, only darkness and the echo of my own heartbeat. Then, slowly, warmth spread across my chest, the same soft light I had seen inside him. It seeped through me, threading through my veins, chasing away the cold that had lived there since the night of the fire. Images flooded my mind, flashes of memory that weren't entirely mine. A woman kneeling beside a dying flame, a boy holding a feather to the sky, a city burning and a figure walking through it untouched. Each image bled into the next until I felt I was standing on the edge of something too vast to name. Then it stopped. When I opened my eyes, Daniel was still there, though his face looked different. Older, wearier, lit from within. What did you do to me? I whispered. He smiled faintly. I didn't give you anything. I reminded you of what you already were. I stepped back, overwhelmed, heart pounding. This is madness. Maybe, he said. But madness is what the world calls what it can't understand. The light between us dimmed. The air cooled again, settling into silence. I wanted to demand more, to make sense of what I'd just seen, felt, become. But something in his eyes told me the truth wouldn't come from words. He turned away, looking toward the chapel door. The fire that should have taken you, he said quietly, chose instead to give you back. The weight of that sentence crushed me. My knees weakened, my breath trembling. Why me? I asked again, desperate. He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand and opened his palm. From his skin, something small drifted downward. A single white feather, glowing faintly as it fell through the air. It landed between us, pure against the dark, untouched by dust or shadow. I knelt instinctively, reaching for it, but the moment my fingers brushed its edge, the glow brightened, blinding, soft, divine. When I looked up, Daniel's eyes met mine, and for an instant, I saw wings reflected in the light behind him. I thought angels were myths, stories told to comfort the desperate, the broken, the dying. But that belief shattered the moment one stood before me and said my name. Daniel's voice was no longer simply human. It carried the echo of something vast, something ancient. The feather at our feet glowed softly between us, its light trembling like a living heartbeat in the dark. He knelt and lifted it, turning it slowly between his fingers. The glow spilled across his skin, and for the first time I saw it clearly. That faint radiance that lived beneath his flesh wasn't light reflected on him. It came from him. You see now, he murmured, his eyes never leaving mine. I wasn't meant to stay in this world, yet I do, because some fires refuse to die. I could barely breathe. You're not... The word caught in my throat, too impossible to speak. He finished for me, his tone both gentle and mournful. Human? Not anymore. The room was utterly still. Even the dust in the air seemed suspended, waiting. He told me the truth in a voice that felt like memory itself. Years ago, he said, there had been another fire. A building filled with families, smoke thick enough to hide the sky. He had gone in again and again, dragging people from the flames until the roof caved in. That was the night I died, he said simply. But someone, wouldn't let me go. They turned me back toward the world, said there were still lives burning quietly that needed saving. As he spoke, I saw flashes of what he described, the roar of that other fire, the faces he'd carried out, the collapse that swallowed him whole. His words painted pictures that felt too vivid to be lies. Since then, he continued, I've been sent where loss leaves its mark, not to undo the pain, but to guide those standing on the edge of surrender. My hands shook as I pressed them to my chest, feeling my own heartbeat answer his story. And you were drawn to me, I whispered. I was drawn to your pain, he said. It called like a beacon. You stood inside the fire but refused to scream. That strength, that's what kept the flames from claiming you. The air between us shimmered, warm and trembling. I felt tears gathering but didn't wipe them away. They fell, hot and sharp, burning paths down my cheeks. Each one felt like a confession of its own. Of every night I'd wished I hadn't survived, of every day I'd woken up still haunted by the smell of smoke. You should hate me, I said, voice cracking. Because of me, you had to come back to this place, to live half a life. He smiled faintly, sadness curling at the edges. You misunderstand. I'm not trapped here. I choose it. Every time someone finds light again, I feel a little more human. For a moment. I stepped closer. Then what are you, Daniel? A ghost? A spirit? He hesitated, then shook his head. I am what's left when mercy refuses to fade. The words hollowed me out. I didn't know whether to believe him or run, but something inside me, the same quiet instinct that had made me follow him through rain and ruin, told me the truth didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time since the fire, I wasn't alone in the darkness of it. He reached forward and brushed a tear from my face. His touch was warm, real. The pain you carry, he whispered, isn't a punishment. It's proof you're still connected. To those who were lost, to those who need you, still. I wanted to ask how he could possibly know what it felt like to lose everything, but then I remembered. He had lost everything, his life, his body, his place in the world. The chapel's air vibrated softly, like the lingering hum of distant wings. Daniel turned away, staring into the corner where the feather's light pooled faintly on the floorboards. There's something you should know, he said quietly. A chill slid through me. What is it? He didn't answer right away. His shoulders rose and fell once, heavy with the weight of years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both sorrow and reverence. You weren't the only one I saved that night. The words struck like lightning, splitting the quiet clean in half. My breath caught as the candlelight bent toward him again, trembling. What do you mean? I managed to whisper, but he didn't reply. He simply turned, his outline blurring in the shimmer of light, and for a fleeting instant I thought I saw another figure standing just behind him, a shadow shaped like someone I'd lost to the flames. Then the glow faded, leaving me alone with the echo of his confession burning in the dark. His words echoed in my mind. You weren't the only one. The sentence rattled through the silence, like a ghost refusing to rest. Daniel's eyes carried a truth he didn't want to speak, and the weight of it pressed on my chest until breathing felt like remembering the fire all over again. There was another survivor, he said at last. his voice a quiet fracture in the still air. Someone who was never found. My pulse stuttered. Another survivor? I'd believed I was the only one left from that inferno, the only life pulled from its hunger. Every report, every investigator, every charred record had said the same thing. Everyone else had perished. Who? I demanded, the word trembling out of me. Daniel looked at me the way someone looks at a storm on the horizon, not afraid of it, but bracing for its arrival. Some truths, he said softly, are meant to find you when you're ready. Ready. The word struck me like a cruel joke. Nothing about my life since the fire had made me ready for anything. My body was still stitched together by grief, my heart held by threads of smoke. Tell me, I insisted. Please. He shook his head once, sorrow flickering across his face like a passing shadow. If I tell you now, you'll search in the wrong places. You must let it come to you. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he gave me the name, the answer, the piece of the puzzle that had been hiding behind every question since the flames. But the look in his eyes stopped me. There was no malice there, only the heavy compassion of someone who had seen what knowledge could destroy. The chapel was quiet except for the sound of rain sliding down its old stone walls. The candles had burned low, their light stretched thin and golden. Daniel stood near the altar, his glow dimming with each breath, as if whatever force tethered him to this world was loosening. What's happening to you? I asked, voice breaking. He smiled faintly. Light doesn't belong in one place for too long. It moves where it's needed. Panic clawed at my chest. No, you can't just leave me like this. You said I was meant to live, to understand. How can I go? He took a step closer, the air warming as he did. You already understand more than you think. The fire took your past, but it gave you sight, not with your eyes, but with your soul. Don't let the fire define you, Elena. Let it remind you what can rise from it. The way he said my name, quiet, reverent, felt like both a blessing and a goodbye. I wanted to reach for him, to hold on to something real before everything shifted again, but my hand met only the faintest resistance, as if touching the edge of a dream. Will I ever see you again? I whispered. He tilted his head, that same small, sorrowful smile tugging at his lips. When you stop looking for me, and start seeing me everywhere. The words hung between us like smoke curling toward the ceiling. Then the glow around him began to fade completely, the golden shimmer collapsing inward until it was only a pale outline trembling in the dim light. I stepped forward, desperate. Daniel, please. But he was already fading. His eyes lifted toward the chapel roof as if hearing something I could not, a sound carried from somewhere between heaven and earth. Your journey isn't over, he murmured. It's only begun. The last of his light flickered once, bright enough to blind me. The candles around us guttered, their flames bowing low, and in the echoing stillness that followed, I felt the sudden weight of emptiness. When I blinked, Daniel was gone. The space where he had stood was filled only with the scent of smoke, not the bitter kind from destruction, but the sweet trace left by extinguished candles. And in the air, drifting down through the fading glow, was a faint dusting of feathers, white, weightless, dissolving before they touched the ground. I stood alone in the chapel, the silence pressing close, realizing I had just watched light return to wherever it belonged. I thought I'd imagined him, until the feather appeared. It lay on my windowsill the next morning, pale and perfect, as if it had been waiting for the light to find it. White as snow, untouched by dust or time, it gleamed against the gray dawn, a quiet defiance against everything I understood about the world. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching it, my breath fogging the glass. The world outside was waking, the hum of distant traffic, the call of birds, the simple rhythm of life continuing. But inside that small room, time had frozen. That feather didn't belong to this world of ordinary mornings. It belonged to the night before, to the glow that had vanished before my eyes. To him. I reached out slowly, half expecting it to vanish when I touched it. But it didn't. It was real, soft, impossibly light, the texture finer than anything I'd ever felt. And when I held it to the light, I saw the faintest shimmer moving along its edge, as though it remembered being made of something more than flesh and bone. I didn't know whether to be comforted or terrified. My mind screamed for reason. It had to be a coincidence, a trick of wind, something explainable. But my heart whispered a different truth. This was Daniel's last message. Still, I needed proof. I needed to know that he wasn't just some illusion my grief had conjured. That night, as the sun bled into dusk, I lit a single candle and placed the feather above its flame. The air shimmered, the heat rising, the light trembling against my fingers. For a moment, I thought it would catch. But then the flame bent away. Not violently, not like a gust of wind. It recoiled, curling to the side, refusing to touch it. I leaned closer, disbelieving. The candle sputtered, hissed, and then, as though ashamed, went out completely. Smoke coiled upward, gray and slow, wrapping around the feather before vanishing. The feather remained untouched, its white surface even brighter in the dim light. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The night of the fire, the figure in the smoke, the chapel of names, Daniel's final words. It all folded together like a story that had been written long before I ever lived it. And in that stillness, I began to understand. The fire hadn't been punished. It had been a revelation. The things I'd lost weren't taken to destroy me. They were burned away, so I could finally see what could never be reduced to ash. I lifted the feather and held it against my chest, feeling its lightness settle over my heartbeat. For the first time in months, my breaths came evenly. The world didn't feel cruel anymore, just unfinished. Over the next few days, I started to move again. I cleaned the small apartment the shelter had given me, one piece at a time. I bought flowers, cheap ones, and set them near the window. I cooked food that filled the air with scent again, and for once, it didn't remind me of smoke. I began volunteering at the same community center Daniel had run. The people there remembered him, spoke his name softly, as though it carried warmth in it. They told me stories, how he'd helped rebuild after floods, after storms, after quiet, invisible losses no one else saw. And every time I listened, I felt that same glow inside me, the one he had awakened in the chapel. One evening, as I was closing up, I saw a child sitting by the window, staring at the rain. His face was streaked with tears, his tiny hands clenched around a photograph. "It's gone," he whispered. "Everything's gone." I knelt beside him, the memory of my own loss rising like smoke. Without thinking, I said the same words Daniel once told me. "Not all flames destroy. Some awaken." He looked at me, confused, but his sobs quieted. I smiled faintly, feeling the echo of Daniel's voice somewhere in the spaces between my own. That night, I placed the feather back on the windowsill. It caught the moonlight, glowing faintly, alive in its own, impossible way. I realized I didn't need proof anymore. Some things are too sacred for evidence. I closed my eyes, letting the cool night air wash through the room. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It hummed gently, full of life. And then I heard it, soft, familiar, unmistakable. My name, carried on the wind. Elena. The sound brushed against my ear like a whisper from a dream. My breath caught as the curtains stirred, though the air was still. Elena. It came again, closer this time, tender, knowing. The candle flickered once, and the feather shimmered brighter, just as it had that night in the chapel. I turned slowly toward the window, heart pounding, knowing deep down, he was still here. 1 year later, I returned to the place where my life ended, and began again. The air smelled different now, alive with earth and rain instead of smoke. Where my house once stood, wildflowers swayed in the breeze, their colors soft but defiant, painting over what had once been nothing but blackened ruin. I knelt in the tall grass and felt the damp soil between my fingers. It was strange how something could die so completely, and yet still bloom again. I pulled the small wooden box from my bag, the one that had carried his feather for months. When I opened it, the white shimmer still lingered faintly along its edges, a living echo of everything that had changed me. I lifted it carefully, the weight barely there, and placed it into the earth. My hand lingered on the ground for a long time, as though touching both the past and the present at once. A warm breeze brushed my cheek. Soft, familiar. "You did well," the wind said, almost human. The words didn't startle me this time. They settled into me like sunlight, filling the empty spaces that grief had once carved out. Tears welled, but they weren't heavy. They were gentle, grateful. For the first time in my life, I cried not because of loss, but because of how far I had come from it. I sat there until the sky began to fade into evening, the horizon painted gold and violet. The world felt wider now, the air richer. The silence that used to haunt me now carried life. The rustle of grass, the hum of distant cicadas, the heartbeat of everything continuing. I closed my eyes, letting the wind move through my hair, and whispered, "Thank you." When I opened them again, I wasn't alone. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, the way dusk softens edges and turns shadows into shapes. But as the colors deepened, the figure took form. Standing among the flowers, calm and familiar, exactly where the fire had once raged hottest. Daniel. He looked the same stillness in his stance, the same quiet light beneath his skin, though it was softer now, as if he no longer needed to hold back the night. "You came back," I said, the words trembling between disbelief and joy. He smiled, that same small, knowing smile I'd seen the first night. "We met." "I never left," he said. I stood slowly, the breeze carrying his words across the field. "Why me?" I asked again, even though part of me already knew. "Why did you choose to save me?" He looked at the flowers beneath our feet, their petals swaying in perfect rhythm with the wind. "Because the world needed your light, more than you knew," he said. "You were always meant to be the one who remembers, the one who helps others rise from their ashes." The memory of the community center flashed through my mind. The faces of the broken, the grieving, the lost who now found comfort in my words. "You mean," I whispered, "that's why you found me?" He nodded once. "I didn't find you. I was led to you, by something greater than both of us." The silence between us deepened, not empty but full of everything that had been said, and everything that never needed to be. I took a step closer, my heart both aching and at peace. "Will I ever see you again?" He smiled, his eyes warm and endless. "You already do." Before I could respond, a gentle light began to rise around him, soft and golden, the same hue that had once filled the chapel. The air shimmered. The petals of the flowers turned to mirrors of light, reflecting him from every direction. I wanted to reach for him, to hold on to that warmth one last time, but my body stayed still. Somehow I knew this was how it had to be. His purpose here had ended. Mine had only begun. He took one step back, then another, the glow brightening until I could barely make out his form. "Don't forget," he said, his voice now almost part of the wind. "The fire didn't destroy you. It revealed you." And with that, the light broke apart, scattering into the breeze like 1,000 tiny stars. The field went quiet again, though not empty. I could still feel him everywhere, in the rustle of leaves, the warmth of sunlight, the steady rhythm of my heart. I pressed my palm to the earth, over the spot where the feather rested, and smiled through my tears. Because I finally understood, Angels don't always descend from heaven. Sometimes they walk through the fire beside you. And when they do, they leave behind more than miracles. They leave you with the courage to keep burning bright, even after the flames have gone. If this story touched something deep inside you, don't let it fade away. Share it with someone who needs a little light tonight. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if an angel walked through your fire. Your words keep these stories alive, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay until the next story finds you. Because sometimes, the next miracle begins with you pressing play again.